Hi, this is Andrei Osachuk. I welcome you to the next video training on Adobe Analytics. Today we'll talk about calculated metrics. By the end of this training, you will know how to create a calculated metric. You will understand the difference between calculated metric and advanced calculated metric in Adobe Analytics. You will also get familiar with a number of functions that you can use while creating your custom calculated metric, and you will understand how to build weighted metrics. And as usual, I will show you an example of using calculated metrics in real life, and I will continue my previous topic about the bounce rate. Today you will at least get to know how to create weighted bounce rate metric, but the approach is universal, so you can use it for all other metrics going forward. Let's get started. As usual, I will start this training with Analysis Workspace, and we will create a new freeform table. First, I will add visits and the page name report. There you go. And the very first exercise with the calculated metric is the following. I want to know how many page views each page has within a visit. So, in other words, I want to know average number of page views per visit for every page. How I can do this? We have metrics visits and page views. And if we divide one metric by another, then we will get that new metric. So let's create a new calculated metric. Click on this plus icon, and in the calculated metric builder, look for page views and visits. Page views divided by visits will give us average number of page views per visit. So page views per visit. And I advise you to set one decimal and save that metric. This will be your first calculated metric. And now you can add this metric to the table and see the average number of page views per visit for every page. Now let's create the bounce rate metric. Despite the fact that we created the bounce rate metric in the previous video training and the bounce rate metric exists by default, I want you to practice a little. So let's add one more metric that will be the bounce rate. And just to remind you, the bounce rate by default is calculated as number of bounces divided by number of entries. This is why we would need to find the bounces metric and divide it by entries. There you go. And since in this case it's easier to look at the metric when its format is set to %, we will do the change, and I will add again decimal places and indicate that the higher the bounce rate is, the worse it is. So let's save it. Hope this was very simple, and now we have two calculated metrics, and both of them are showing us some averages. Now the next question is, what if you want to also compare bounce rate on the site for every page with, for example, bounce rate segmented by some criteria. For example, bounce rate for mobile devices. So for example, we have here a segment visits from mobile devices, and I can easily add that segment under the metric to update the metric. So basically now it's showing us bounce rate, but only for those visits that happened on mobile devices. And we also can add the bounce rate metric as is, so that we will be able to compare the results. So now, for example, we see that for the home page, the bounce rate for those who came on mobile devices is slightly higher. And that's fine to use a segment under the metric, but what if you want to use this type of calculation very often and in different tables or configurations of your analysis breakdowns, etc. It will be not so convenient to always use two elements together. Instead, you can create so-called advanced calculated metric that will combine the metric with a segment. And now let's do this. I will edit the bounce rate metric. Now I am back to metric builder and my goal is to add a segment. Click here and add segment. In the new container, you need to find the segment that you already have. So this will be visits from mobile devices. And now I just need to put inside this container the calculation, the metrics. So I will just drag and drop bounces and entries, and we'll make sure that the formula is accurate. So bounces divided by entries, this is my bounce rate, and I want to calculate this metric only for those visits that were on mobile devices. And I will update the name so that we will be able to differentiate bounce rate from bounce rate on mobile devices, and we'll save this metric. Now I will add this metric and we will be able to compare whether these two metrics match or not. So as you see, they match. And I do not need these two elements anymore, since now I have a metric and I can use it in every single report or analysis, and it's very convenient. So similar to that, you may want to create a bounce rate, for example, for non-mobile devices or for something else. And just remember, this is just an example. I'm not saying that you need to create bounce rate for mobile versus non-mobile, just to demonstrate you the capabilities of Adobe Analytics. So what we've done with you was an advanced calculated metric. Advanced calculated metric will allow you to use segments. If you do not have access to advanced calculated metrics, then you will not be able to segment a metric. Now let's have a look at our pages, and as a part of the analysis, I want to know on which pages the bounce rate is the highest one. So I will order this table by the bounce rate metric. And now I can see that the highest bounce rate, 100%, was on this page, while it was a little bit lower but still very high on these pages, etc. But you can see that these pages with the highest bounce rate, they have only few visits, so they're not popular pages, they are low traffic pages. And obviously this is not where I want to focus on, because first I want to try to fix the problem with the high bounce rate on the pages that have a high level of traffic. And again, if I order the pages by visits, these are the pages that I may be interested in, or some other pages. But you see that top 10 pages are those that have more than 2.5 thousand visits within my reporting period. And if I again order this by bounce rate, this will be just a couple of dozens visits on these pages. This is not my priority. And I wonder how I can look at the pages with a high bounce rate and with high traffic volume. This is the question. And to answer this question, to build a good analysis for that, I will need to create another metric that will show me, for example, the bounce rate only for those pages that have more than for example 2.5 thousand visits. And now I will show you how you can do this. There will be two methods, and I will start with the simplest one and let's say less flexible one. But it's good to start with that method as it's simple. As usual, I will go to the edit metric, back to metric builder, and we will need to use functions. Functions will be available for you if you have access to advanced calculated metrics. First function that we will take a look at is called if, and I will add this function to the definition area. So it works very simple. There are three containers. In the first container you should have a Boolean logic. For example, something is higher than something, like for example visits is higher than 2.5 thousand. And if so, if this is true, then you would want to, for example, show something in the second container. So you will show the bounce rate. Otherwise, you may want to show something else. And let's start with the condition. So I want to filter, so not filter, but I want to calculate the bounce rate only in case if the number of visits will be higher than 2.5 thousand. So I will need to use another function so that I can compare number of visits to something. And in this case, there is a function greater than or equal. I will be using the greater than or equal function. I will also add it to the logical test part. And here, greater than or equal function works the way that you compare one metric x to another metric y. If metric x is higher or equal to metric y, then this will return true. Otherwise, this will return false. So, how we can compare number of visits? Very easily. We will look for visits and drag this metric to the metric x. Then we will need to compare visits to 2.5 thousand. How to add it? Also very easily. Add here static number and set it to 2.500. So now the condition is if visits number is equal or higher 2.5 thousand, then this will return true. Otherwise, this will return Boolean false. Now let's continue with the if function. Now we want actually to return something, and we need to specify what this function should return. In our case, this function should return the bounce rate. So I just add our metric to this place. Okay. Bounces divided by entries. You may want to add any other metric here, so it's up to you. Decide. This depends on what you want to do. And you want to also return something if the condition returns Boolean false. So in my case, I want to return 0, static number, and I will enter 0. So this is how our function currently looks. And I think that in order to make it simpler, I will replace the bounce rate with the visits, so that first we will take a look how it works. It just for demonstration purpose, it will be easier to understand. And I will remove all other metrics that we have underneath. So now the function is, if the number of visits is equal or higher than 2.5 thousand, then we would see number of visits for that line item that we have in the table for the page name. Otherwise, it will return 0. So let me rename it as visits for pages with 2.5 thousand plus visits, something like that. And I will set it to decimal, something like that, and save it. So now let's have a look what we have. For these pages, we still can see the number of visits. Let's go to the next pages, and there you go. So these pages have less than 2.5 thousand visits, and this is why this metric is showing us 0. So I just wanted you to understand how it works, right? So now we will update the number of visits with the bounce rate. I will go back to this metric and we'll update it. So it will be bounce rate for pages with 2.5 thousand visits. Switch back to percent, and I will remove the visits metric and will add the bounce rate metric. So it will be bounces divided by entries. So there you go, and let's save it. So now we see the bounce rate, and here, right, we see bounce rate number, bounce rate, and now let's go to the next page of the pages, and here we have 0, right? So now if you want to order all our pages by the bounce rate, you see that it will show us the numbers only for pages with high volume of traffic. So if you go next to the other pages, we will see 0 there. So no bounce rate is calculated. This is how we did it. So now it's very convenient when you sort your results by this weighted metric. You can see only those pages that have a significant number of traffic. This was a very simple approach, but this is not a good approach, and I will explain you why. Now when we work with this condition, we compare number of visits with the number that we can see in this column. And if I update the date range for this report, this number of visits will be either smaller or higher. So for example, if I update this reporting period to 1 day, then I won't see any page with the number of visits higher than 2.5 thousand, and my metric will stop working. It's not relevant anymore. This is why this is not a good approach. But I wanted to show it to you so that you will get an idea how you can use the if function and higher or equal to function. So now we need to update this metric that it will still work for the metrics with a high volume of traffic, and that approach, this new approach, should work regardless of what date range we will choose. So there should be kind of a variable dynamic value that should be used instead of the static number that we used here as a threshold. And for this purpose, we would need to use another function, which is called percentile. Percentile is the function that may look very tricky, since in the official documentation it's not explained the way that it will be easy to interpret the result or interpret the purpose of the function. This is why I want to quickly explain it to you based on one of the examples that I use on my trainings. So let's take a look at this graph. This is called bell curve distribution or normal distribution. So the idea is, on the horizontal axis we have number of visits, on the vertical axis we have number of pages. And there are many pages that have average number of visits. So here, under this part of the curve, we have most of our pages on our website. And these pages, for example, on average may be viewed, I don't know, for example, every week there are 10 or 20 visits on these pages, and this is kind of average for our website. However, there are pages on the left, in this part, that have only few visits. There is a small number of such pages. So, for example, there are maybe some pages that can be viewed only once or a couple of times per week. And these pages are here. And there are some pages that may have more visits, and there are a bit more pages with a high number of traffic. And there are pages that are visited very frequently, and they are on the right. So basically, when you look at the curve on the bell curve line, the square under this curve represents the number of pages. But instead of pages, you can use any other dimension. So in here, top visited pages on the site, and this may be your home page if you are in a commerce company and the retention business is a significant part of it, probably 70%. Then the login page may be also one of those pages that are frequently used, so frequently viewed, visited by your customers or visitors on the site. So now let's have a look what the percentile is. If you want to look, for example, at top 5 pages by number of visits, you are interested in this square, in this part, and this is what is called 95th percentile. For example, you want to look at top 10 pages by number of visits, then it will be this this part, and this will be 19th percentile. So if you want to look at only 1% of the most visited pages, this would be somewhere here. This would be 99th percentile. So this is the percentile. So now I hope it's clear what the percentile purpose is. And now let's get back to Adobe Analytics. Let's create a metric for bounce rate that will be using a percentile function. I will click Edit and go to our metric. What we need to do, we need to get rid of this condition greater than or equal when visits is higher than 2,500 visits. Instead of that, you would need to update this condition to use a percentile function. So I will remove the static number and we'll look for percentile and we'll add it to metric Y area. Now we want to use the percentile 95th and set it for visits number. And so how it will work? If the visits number is higher than or equal the 95th percentile by visits, then it should calculate the bounce rate. Otherwise, it will return 0. So it will be percentile, it will be bounce rate with percentile. And I will save it. Now let's see what has changed. I will order all the pages by visits. We'll also remove the metric that we do not need. And I think that for better understanding how the percentile function works, I would need to add one more function that would be showing me the number of visits. And I will add the metric by editing this one. So what I want to do is to use visits with percentile, and instead of the bounce rate calculation, I will add visits. And this is just to show me the number of visits for those pages that are top 5 pages by visits, so that we can easily identify the dynamic threshold that we set with the percentile function. So this is it. So now we should expect 0 in the second column, where for the pages that are not in those 5% pages. So I will scroll the pages, and we should identify the threshold. So there you go. So the threshold for this time period is 62 visits, and it's not a problem that we do not see bounce rate. This means that for these pages the bounce rate is just 0. So for example, here you see that we have some numbers. And now let's check whether the percentile function helped us to get rid of the dependency on the static threshold. So if you update now this date range, for example, from a day to 7 days, and we'll apply it, now we still should see the pages or top 5 pages by visits. So again, I will scroll the pages, and we should see when 0 appears. So this is the dynamic threshold. So now we have 131 page which were included in the top 5 pages by visit for this date range, and it will be changing every time when you change the date range. And so basically our goal was to make sure that we can focus on those pages that have a significant number of visits. And if we now order the page by the bounce rate with percentile, we can pay attention only to those pages that have significant traffic. And if we would take a look at the standard out of the box bounce rate metric, and would order our pages by this bounce rate, we would see that we have again lots of different pages with low volume of traffic, but we don't want to pay attention to them. This is why we created a bounce rate metric with percentile. And obviously, if you want to, you can update the K value. If you want to include only, for example, 1% of your pages by number of visits, then update it to 99th percentile. And you can use this approach with everything. So for example, in addition to bounce rate, you may want to use pages per visit or average order value or something else. And this is a good approach. These metrics are usually called weighted bounce rate or weighted something else. So you decide how you want to name these metrics. My goal was to show you how you can use the percentile function to get more value while you're working with Analysis Workspace and with Adobe Analytics, obviously. This is it. Let me know if you have any questions about the advanced calculated metrics, about functions that you can use in the builder. And if you have any metrics you don't understand how to use, or you do not understand functions that you can use in the metric builder, let me know. Ask your questions underneath of this video in the comments. Also let me know if you have some cases that you want probably to make a metric but you don't know how. I will also be happy to help you. I will try to solve your challenges. I will try to help you. Thank you very much for watching this video, and talk to you next time.